Now, Sonic X Shadow Generations is an interesting proposition because it's actually 2 games. It's Sonic Generations, or a tarted up version of that released in 2011, and Shadow Generations, which is a brand new... it's fairly related to the original one, actually. What was your first Sonic game?
The first one I remember is Shadow the Hedgehog on the GameCube, but I know I did play Sonic games before that, because, I mean, you lent me old Game Boy ones.
Yeah, the Game Boy 2D ones were actually...
yeah, very good games.
Pretty good, actually, and I remember you played Sonic Adventure a lot on my Dreamcast.
Yeah, you were telling me about that, and I couldn't remember for the life of me.
Which you can't remember, made a big impression of you. Well, the thing is... I mean, my first was Sonic the Hedgehog on the Mega Drive, which I received as a Christmas present. As a
fair few years there.
Yeah, I'm kind of giving away my age there. So we are very much the target audience for this, because we are, even you young whippersnapper, are veterans of the series. Now, Sonic Generations was the first game to capitalise on an anniversary of Sonic the Hedgehog. It was... I won't spend too long on Sonic Generations because Shadow is the new one. Basically, it's the complete original Sonic Generations game. It's got 9 worlds. There's 2 acts in each world. The first act is classic Sonic, which is 2D platform, as in the traditional Sonic 2D platforming. Act 2 is always more 3D, actually, and it's kind of meant to be like the more modern Sonic. And these are split up into 3 lots of 3. So the first is classic Sonic, Green Hill Zone, that kind of thing. The middle section is the middle part of Sonic's history as it was in 2011, so Sonic Adventure, that kind of thing. And then the last 3 was the more modern Sonics of the time. There are also like challenge levels that you'd have to play a limited number of to progress. Everything was on a kind of hub world where it's like this white 2D hub world where you... Pretty simple, to be honest. Very simple platforming to get to the challenge levels and to the next stages. And then, of course, you've got the bosses for each of the main sections. Now, Shadow Generations kind of takes that idea and runs. Although, before I mention that, I should just say with Sonic Generations, what they've actually done to the game. Not a lot. It was a good but flawed game in 2011. It's still a good but flawed game. The frame rate is locked to 60 frames per second, which
just seems crazy in today's standards, doesn't it?
It's a Sonic game. It should be fast. It should be fluid. But I'm guessing that's due to technical reasons, or maybe they didn't want to put too much time into it. It's very, very buggy. Oh, there is one modern concession, actually. It defaults by taking the lives out of the level, because there was a live system. Anyone who's listened to my videos will know that I think lives are a very outdated concept. Lives are there for arcade machines that you put 50p in.
It would be a nice option to be able to switch them on and off.
You can switch it on.
Oh, you can switch them on and off.
You can. So if people are listening to this saying, a guy doesn't know what he's talking about, I mean, you're partly right, but in some respects, but you can switch it back on. Yeah. So if you
enjoy that challenging aspect of it, having the lives, you can switch them back on.
For Sonic Generations, yes, you can. So and it also means you get that more authentic Sonic Generations experience. My preference would be to switch them off because there's enough challenge in the game without
having the lives involved.
Exactly, and it's not an arcade game where you put 50p in the slot and you have to artificially shorten it. So I don't see the point.
You touched upon earlier about there being Act 2 acts and 3 acts where you can switch. Whereas one act is 2D and the other is more 3D.
3D, yeah.
Would you say one is much more enjoyable than the other, or do they both have their pros and cons?
Yeah, I'd say they're both good. I mean, obviously the 2D stuff is more there for the purists. When you're playing Green Hill Zone, which is obviously the very first act in the Act 1 of the first stage of the game, and it's largely a reconstruction of the Green Hill Zone from the very first Sonic the Hedgehog game, and the absolute nostalgia, even playing it this time around, just the absolute waves of nostalgia that absolutely hit me. And it looks fantastic as well, even all these years later. It's 2011 that was originally released, and it still looks great. Actually, what they've done to it. There's no ultra widescreen support. I just thought I'd throw that in, but it does actually look really, really nice.
So obviously, Sonic is a remaster, and now we have Shadow coming out as the new element. how much would you say of the game is new and how much is a remaster? Like, in comparative lengths, are they comparatively similar?
They're fairly similar. I'd say actually probably Shadow Generations is a bit longer, and I'll tell you what. I'll talk actually in a bit of detail about this. It's a similar structure to Sonic Generation, but the hub world... I mean, so you still got your 9 overall worlds. There's still 2 acts to each world. It's not a strict Act 1 is 2D, Act 2 is 3D. They're both a mixture. And Act 2, even Act 2 in Sonic Generations were a mixture of 2D and 3D anyway. So, it's basically the whole thing is like Act 2, even though they are still split up with Act 2. And that's because it's only Shadow that he doesn't... It's set during the story of the original Sonic Generations. He's been sucked into his own bit, and there's a much more defined story, actually. The story isn't really there on the first one. It's quite mild, but the hub world, this is the biggest difference because Sonic Frontiers, which was a couple of years ago now, that was the fully 3D Sonic game, and it surprised everyone, even Sega, actually how well that worked and how well it was received. So they've basically got like a mini Sonic Frontiers style hub. I say mini, it is actually fairly big. Obviously not as big as Sonic Frontiers, and you've got this in between the levels, and once the challenge stages start dropping in, which you have to complete 2 of each to get keys, and you have to get 3 keys to unlock the bosses and so forth. So that does actually add quite a bit to the game. In terms of just purely the levels, they're pretty comparable, actually.
So they have added a fair amount to the game as well as bolting in Sonic Generations. So it's not like, here's a remaster with 5 hours new content. It is...
They've more than doubled the length, basically, because you've not only got the Sonic Generations complete experience there with very slight tweaks, you've also got Shadow Generations, which is a completely new set of levels, a completely new hub. Everything about that is new. It adds to the story because it's, as I said, it's happening at the same time. You actually see bits of the other story happening whilst you're playing as well. They have actually added in some DLC as well with Sonic 3, where you go into Tokyo and you've actually got Keanu Reeves voicing Shadow as well, which is quite odd. But
that's probably to do with tying in with the film, is it?
It's the film tie-in.
Yeah. So all marketing purposes, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's more to do in Shadow, and I will say this as well. I like Sonic Generations, but it does have its flaws, and there are flaws that they really could have fixed with this sort of remastering of it, because all the glitches are still there.
Because you would have thought if they're not going to fix the issues it had, that they would have just left it out and just released Shadow Generations. They didn't need to bolt it on there for the sake of it if they're not fixing it.
I think they were probably scared of the length of Shadow Generations, because I mean, if you just ignored Sonic Generations, you could get through Shadow Generations probably 6 or 7 hours at the absolute most if you really wrung every last drop out of it.
So you were saying that the stories happen at the same time. Do you need to play Sonic Generations first, or can you play Shadow first and then Sonic, or just Shadow?
If you're going to play them both, you definitely want to play Generations first. Not only because it narratively makes more sense. You can actually play Shadow Generations just by itself. I mean, the story, as I said, although the story is better than in Generations, you can kind of ignore the tie-ins to Generations and just stick with what story it gives you for, Shadow and his backstory, which you'll have seen a slightly different version of that if you've seen the Sonic 3 film, actually. But yeah, if you're going to play them both, you definitely want to play Sonic Generations first, and for another reason as well, Shadow Generations is actually a much better game.
And is that due to game level design, or is it because it's less buggy? What is behind it being a much better game?
Mostly because it's less buggy. I do recall the original being buggy. I did play it on the PC back when it first released, and my PC just about ran it. Just about. And I was really blown away, especially by the 3D levels. Absolutely fantastic and amazing. But the thing with Sonic Generation, I don't know whether Sega kind of like ran out of time as it got towards the end of development, but the level design kind of gets slightly sloppy in that last 3 levels. I think it's Crisis City in the first game. I mean, you're not just falling off a platform, you're actually falling through the floor. There were several parts where, because as key parts, obviously, when it's shifting from 2D to 3D, the camera is supposed to swing around, which opens up a new path. Sometimes that wasn't happening. And there was one run I was doing, I got all 3 of the KOs, all the collectibles, and then the camera didn't swing round, it didn't trigger properly, and I was just stuck in this corner with the wrong perspective in, and I had to restart the level. That's quite frustrating.
Yeah, that's annoying when that happens.
Shadow Generations is less buggy. There are still a few minor glitches, more minor than in Sonic Generations, and the design is better all around, though.
You mentioned at the beginning that on Sonic Generations it was capped at 60 frames. Is that the same with Shadow?
No, they double it to 120 frames per second, which I still would have liked it uncapped, but it's
still double what Sonic has on offer.
It feels significantly smoother as a result of that, yeah.
Should we do it separately or together? Do you want to give them separate scores or do you want to give them a combined score?
It's getting a combined score because it's a combined. You're spending. I think they're asking £40 or £45 for this, which it's not full price, which is good because, as I said, half of the game is a re-release and the other half is not that long in the grand scheme of things.
I wonder if at a later date they'll separate them if you just wanted to buy Shadow, if they might do that.
I doubt it, to be honest. I can't see it happening. They'll just reduce the price of this when it stops selling. But in terms of score, and I have thought long and hard about this, it's getting 79%, which on our review scale is good. I know it falls into the fabled 7 out of 10. It's just got a few too many glitches, especially on the Sonic Generations portion of thing, and it is a part of the game. Does it drag the Shadow Generations down? Well, I mean, there are good parts and bad parts. So, I mean, you can't really separate them out. They're both part of the same game.
It's a shame because if they spent a bit more time fixing up Sonic Generations, you'd
have
a much more respectable score there.
And I did get the impression as well from Shadow Generations that they did similarly start to run out of time towards the end of this as well, because again you can see the level design just getting a little bit more slapdash as you go on.
Do you think part of that was there a hurrying to get it released in time to tie in with a movie?
Yeah, basically, yeah, and Christmas, yeah. You got the double whammy of that, but it is still a very good game. The graphics are brilliant. I did play the Switch version. I should point out the Switch version. It is the complete game. It's a little bit slower. It's quite a lot slower. It's the frame rate is quite a bit lower and the graphics don't look as good. But on any of the other consoles or on PC, it just looks incredible. It sounds incredible. Most of the design decisions in Shadow Generations work well. It's got a better story. Sonic Generations, for its flaws, is still an overall good game that everyone should play at least once. You don't have to complete it if you just get annoyed with the later slapdash level design. But especially for the price, it is a good purchase, especially if, or perhaps even only if you are a veteran of the Sonic series.
But if you're new to the series, it's not necessarily a recommend. There's better entry points, would you say?
Yeah, maybe go for something like Sonic Mania or even Sonic Frontiers, which actually was a lot better than I think most people were expecting it to be.